Hey, I'm Nick. I'm the head of growth here at Close.io. I just got done recording a Getting Started with Sales Operations webinar. It was my first one. Had a ton of fun. Hopefully there's a lot of good information in there for you. So enjoy the recording, and please provide any feedback or thoughts that you have. Looking forward to it. And we'll see you when I have the next one. Thanks. Get started. Okay, so let's go through what we're going to cover with this. I'm going to go through some high level stuff. The big part of this is how to do sales operations or get started with it without hiring someone. So I'll cover that. I'll go through a first experiment and sort of the main things that you should be thinking about when going through your first experiment, how to measure and then communicate the results. And then I'll share a story here internally that happened late last year when I joined the team, on how we saw an issue, we identified it, and figured out what we were going to do to change it. We made an experiment, and then we effectively doubled our close rate as a result. I'll go through some recommendations, and then we'll do Q&A. So that's the agenda for this afternoon here. So first, I want to go through some really quick industry terms and slang. Some of you probably already know this information, but it's good to have. You're going to get access to this document after the call, along with the recording. So this is more for preserving this for when you're going through and looking at it. But a lot of times in this industry, when you're reading blogs or you're listening to podcasts or whatever subject matter that you're looking at when it comes to sales operations or just startups in general, is you get a lot of slang and a lot of different meanings for things, because a lot of it is new and a lot of people are using the terms in maybe a place that doesn't fit. I know I do this all the time, and my team corrects me quite often. So there's a few of them. Again, this is more for the deck and preserving through time. But the big one that we'll talk about today, or I'll mention a lot today, is KPI, which is basically key performance indicator. Think of it as one of the most important stats that your company lives by. It's the stat or stats that your company measures success off of. For us in the software business, it's monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue, MRR or ARR. Those are the numbers, as well as the growth of those numbers over time. So yeah, there's some of the industry terms there. If I say a term or something like that, just hop into chat and ask what that is, and then I'll do my best to clarify it. All right. So first, sales ops is not a new concept. This has been around for a while. Companies like IBM and Microsoft and sort of these large big box technology companies have been hiring sales operations people for a long time, or they've been grooming people that they hire in sort of entry-level analyst positions into a sales operations role. They might not call it that, but essentially it's what it is. I mean, it's basically an analyst position or an analyst role. The big thing that's changed in the last couple of years is just the access to data and the tools that we have that make this job easier. So before, the data wasn't there. You would have to really go, force the sales team to record the information. It would be a very manual process. Now we have all these tools that are really just generating the raw data in the background, and you have the access to it. But it creates another issue where you get flooded by that data. So, and it's really hard to decipher what's actually happening because of just drowning in it. So I think when you're thinking about this, don't think of sales operations as something new. Kind of apply the main fundamentals of business to it, and you'll usually go in the right direction. Think about it very practically. But the big thing that has changed, which changes who you would look to recruit for this role, is all about the access to the data and the new tools that we have, and can they effectively use them to be successful? That's really the new concept as part of sales ops. And when it all comes down to it, the number one priority that when you're thinking about sales operations and either applying resources on your team to do this, or doing experiments, or anytime you're thinking about this subject, always tell yourself or ask yourself, is this going to help my sales team close more deals faster? As you scale your sales team and your sales efforts, The name of the game is, can you get the same amount of people to close more deals in the same amount of time? Can we accelerate that? Can we remove pain points for them? Can we make it easier for them to qualify people? Can we make it easier and faster for them to close people? Can we remove manual data entry from their workflow so they have more time to speak on the phone and do demos? So that needs to be the number one priority for it. And that's what you should care about above all else. And really thinking about this and what this webinar is targeted at is either VP of sales, director of sales, or founders that know that they have to do some optimization within their sales process. And the advice may be, you got to hire a sales ops person. The advice that we're giving here or sharing here is how to do it on your own at first, heading towards hiring someone. And here's really the reasons why you shouldn't waste your time trying to hire someone. This day and age, a modern sales ops, person is super difficult to find, and they may not even exist because you have to have all of the modern sales capability. So you have to be able to sell or have sold in the past. If you're a person that's sold software in the past, that's changed a lot in terms of people's buying process over the last few years. And they need to be aware of that. They need to be aware of all the new tools. So these people are not, out and about and looking around. They don't teach this stuff in college. It's all changing a lot. The tools are changing. So it's just a constant, occupation or role that's constantly changing and requires new skills to be learned at all times. So, if you think about it, if you're trying to recruit a sales ops person, they need to be really good at sales. So they have to have sold in the past so they can understand and have empathy for the people on the sales team that they're helping. They need to know the tools. And again, there's no, other than some really advanced, Excel or spreadsheet class, there's no, college, classes that you can take to do sales operations, especially in the context that we're in with, with technology or software products. And they almost need to be quasi engineers. They have to have some, entry level ability to code, whether it's using SQL or Python or working with APIs to get data from, so they need to be able to know that and then learn it over time as things change. And then they got to be able to manage people. You're managing a sales process or you're helping optimize it. So you have to understand how all those things work. So it's finding a very difficult person. And usually too, with your, where you're at in your business, I'm assuming, and this is definitely the case for us at Close.io, sales operation is not a full-time job. It's not a, 40-hour a week, role. It's something where we're doing 1 or 2 experiments a month, and we'll go on that way because we only have, two full-time salespeople on the team here at Close.io. So you don't need a full-time person to do that. I'm doing sales operations on top of, a bunch of other things at the same time. So, hiring some for that is just you're throwing good money away. And really what I found over time, and I think I'm a prime example of this, is the best way to find a sales operations person as you scale is somebody that's either on your sales team or somebody you're going to hire as they grow in their career with their personal growth. Quick story, when Stelly hired me to the Elastic sales team before we turned into Close.io, I didn't really know anything. They really took a big risk on me. And as they started to teach me sales and teaching me how to sell software, I was naturally, excited, and my own personal growth about coding, teach myself how to code, learning some of these sales operations type of concepts. I didn't call it that at the time, but that's what, that was more or less what I was doing. And they really allowed me to kind of find myself in doing that and really work towards that in my career. And that's, why I'm in a place now today, 5-6 years later, to actually do this full for the team. So, try to think about the people on your sales team or in your company now that they may be doing an entry-level role right now, but in 2-3 years from now, could they be that person that you require as your team scales? And it's also the least expensive way to do that, because if they're a salesperson, they're generating revenue for you right now, and then when you promote them, it's going to be a less expensive hire there if you think about it. So okay, first experiment. There's really 4 things you got to do when you're looking at an experiment. So 4 things to think about. You want to determine the metric you want to change, and just a single metric. Don't try to impact 3 or 4 at the same time. Just pick one, and that's your KPI. Establish a goal, or failure. So what's the pass fail of this experiment? And then introduce a specific change, your hypothesis that you think is going to equal success. So what are you going to change within the data of the experiment to make that goal happen? And only focus on that. So if you have if you have your sales team and you want to do a specific experiment, make that the focus. Incentivize them on doing that. And forget about sort of the other metrics that you're working on at the time to really, make that priority. And then obviously the last one is track the results. Now, before you start, you need to be clear about what you're going to do after the experiment is over, if you succeed and if you're going to fail. And then the table at the bottom on this slide shows you sort of the table that you can look at. So, using the example of, opportunity to close rate, increasing that number, you have the goal, you have what you're going to do if you succeed. And then if you're going to fail, what are you going to change? I have, instead of you're fired, it should be probably, if you can't increase your opportunity to close rate, that probably means that your leads are poor and you need to go back to the drawing board in terms of where your leads are coming from. So that's what you actually should put there. Haven't seen any questions in the chat. Please feel free to put them in if any have popped up so far. And I'll read them off, as we go here. So now next step, there's sort of 2 balances to the scale when you think about this. So are you going to do an experiment that affects your sales reps results or an individual sales reps results? And some experiments there are, you can change their incentives up. If you're having trouble with them being productive or doing the amount of activity or the number of calls or emails or demos that you want them to be doing, if you change the incentive up, does that change the result? If you are making changes to what they're saying, their sales approach, that's an experiment. So the intent of that experiment is to affect a result with an individual sales rep. That's far different than the other, which is your sales process, where you're sort of making a team-wide change to get a result. So really think about and be clear what you're trying to affect, and that's going to make it much easier for you to implement those changes. And you can do both at the same time. Just make sure they're separated in your train of thought, then also the data that you're collecting. And it may be easier for some of you just to start on the sales rep side, to just say, okay, Sally, I have the last couple months, we think, you haven't been doing as much activity as we think you should. So this next month, if you do X amount of calls or X amount of activity, you're going to get this goal. You're going to get this amount of a bonus. If you really hit this upper tier goal, you're going to get this next bonus tier. So kind of tier that out, and then the result of that is you're going to expect them to do that going forward, and then you're going to see the results of that added activity. How many more deals did that close? How much more revenue did they bring in? How much more commission did they make? And then it shows them with that extra activity what they can accomplish, what's possible. As opposed to the sales process, which is more high level, affecting total revenue numbers or the conversion rate of something, or trying to understand the quality of leads that are coming into your sales process. So be aware of that. So some tips on measuring results. Make sure you can track it first, and don't try to automate it all. If you're doing this stuff on your own and starting out with it, you need to make it easy for yourself. So you're not going to be collecting this forever So you don't need to be doing it every day. So when you pick the KPI or pick what data you need to track, make sure you can track it or pull it after the fact, and then go with it from there. Don't worry about all this automation stuff. It's just going to waste time, in terms of you preparing when you should be executing on making the goal happen. That's where you should be spending your time, not on setting it all up. And another big point is avoid having the sales team record the data for you. I've made this mistake many times in the past, where we're going to introduce a new experiment, usually around, the most common one I hear is, we want to know how people hear about us. And typically what people do, and I've done this to my own fault in the past, is I tell all the salespeople, okay, first question you ask them when you're qualifying them is where they heard about us. And then go into the CRM and then log this piece of information in. And A, they either do it wrong, B, they don't do it at all, or C, you forget about it and you don't enforce it and it just becomes a huge mess. And it also conflicts with the main priority of helping your sales team close deals faster. By giving them more shit to log in, it's gonna be a mess. So the whole point is to remove friction, not introduce friction, even if you're doing experiments. Do tests at least 30 days long or even longer. Trying to do stuff week to week, especially with, a lot of us, our sales processes are not a week long, our sales cycle. So make these, longer period of time, look for, try to get a trend out of it, not just a flash in the pan. And try to, if possible, always compare results to a time in the past. So if you just get a result and you don't know if that's better or worse than what you did the previous year, the previous quarter, the previous month, you're just wandering aimlessly. You don't know if that's better. So a lot of times what needs to happen is, if you want to track, if you want to create an experiment for the fourth quarter of 2017, you need to be able right now to figure out and set up the tracking for the third quarter. So when you do the experiment in the fourth quarter, you can look and see what the results were in the third quarter. Now, you don't need to tell the team about that, but you just, ahead of time, you need to make sure that you're able to track it, even though you're not going to actually share it with anybody yet. You're using it for a future experiment that you have being pulled up. So big issue right now with a lot of our industry in general is that we're all drowning in data, and it's really hard to figure out what's happening. And it's hard to pull information from that. And then it's even more difficult when you're describing it to people or showing it to other people. So here's what I do. Here's what I do basically. I make this mistake, and for the Close IO people on the team, the first bullet point. In the past, I've had these huge spreadsheets full of all these stats of all these different things, and usually when I give them a one metric to look at, and then I reference that to a larger spreadsheet, I have to tell them what cell it's in. It's so confusing. So I'm trying to get away from that myself. So instead, I just create a spreadsheet that just has the single metrics in one place. So there's a summary, there's a written summary of what it is, and then I'm referencing a spreadsheet that just has the core, raw data that I need, only the couple of rows of metrics, and then it's just super easy and it's isolated. And then for it, only track or include the relevant data. If you have a formula that only requires 2 variables, don't have 7 in the spreadsheet. It's just useless data that you don't need, and it's going to confuse the people you're communicating with. So like I said, communicating the results, you should always have a written summary. Don't just give people charts. They don't know what the hell they're going to be reading, especially salespeople. I'm the biggest proponent of this because I am a salesperson at heart. And I actually do spend part of my day doing sales. So when I just get random charts, I have no, I need context and explain to what it means. Never provide, raw numbers. And this is especially important when you're communicating to your board and to investors. And I give an example of what a bad and a good version of this is. Always show the percentage, always show the growth or decline to give them context on how things are going. And then when you're looking with individual reps, speak with them one-on-one, and don't do it via email. Either hop on a call with them or physically have a meeting with them to explain to them what it means and what they can do in the future. And what this is going to do as well is help them understand how to read the data that they're getting on an ongoing basis. So for example, if you're starting a new commission structure with them, and there's some tests or experiments in there, you should go over how the results are generated so they can read the commission reports on their own going forward. So it's an investment of your time that will pay off, for months to come. Now here's a little tip here that we've been doing here internally at Close.io. I kind of learned this in my last startup, on showing progress towards a goal. So typically, a lot of us, I'm assuming, you have a goal for a month or for a quarter, but you're giving people updates on a weekly basis. What we try to do, or what I try to do, is try to give people context visually on how things are going to this point. So here's a sample graph that shows, the light blue line is the pace of where we should be, and then the blue line is where we're currently at. So you can see in this example chart that we're behind the pace. So we got to pick things up. So it's super easy to see and kind of get that understanding of what's happening. All right, so now we're getting here close to the end here. Going to go through an example. When I first got put into this role on the team and working with the sales team here. One of the first things I noticed was one of the things that I noticed was we were creating a ton of opportunities. Our revenue was fine. We were doing what we planned to do, and we were continuing to grow, but we were just creating so many opportunities that wouldn't close. We had like a 40 something, less than a sub 50% opportunity to close rate. So using the 4-step process that I talked about in the beginning, I mapped out, okay, we want to impact the opportunity to close rate. Our goal is to do above 50%. The change we're going to make is we're going to change the opportunity qualification criteria, because basically what I noticed in interviewing the sales team was, when we did a pipeline review, that they were talking about, opportunities or deals that we didn't know anything about. We didn't know who the decision maker was. We didn't know the actual full process for it. So, we really need to make that more stringent on what an opportunity means, and then police that going forward. And then for the tracking part of it, I wanted to track the close rate on a rolling 30-day basis. Now for us, our sales cycle is about 15 days because we have a 14-day trial. And here at Close.io, it's an inbound sales process. We're only selling to people that sign up for the free trial, 95% of the time. So that we create on purpose a very short sales cycle to only working with people that are in the free trial right now, and they have an intent on using the product. Now people reactivate their trial over time, so they can come back into the process, but that's what we're working with here. So I wanted to look at 30 days for all the leads or the trials that were created in a 30-day period. Which ones did we close? What was the percent? So I was setting the specific criteria of what the subject matter was, or the source data. So here's what we did during the experiment to make sure it was a success. So we did a weekly pipeline review for me to verify that the opportunities were real. And if they weren't, we would delete them, or we would tell them, hey, you need to do X, Y, or Z before this becomes an opportunity. We ignored everything else. So in the weekly team meeting or my weekly report to the rest of the team, the only KPI that I shared was the opportunity to close rate or the progress towards it. And then on my own internally, I monitored how the revenue was impacted, because when you're trying to increase your opportunity to close rate, you're naturally going to reduce the number of opportunities that get created. I wanted to see how much that was going to negatively or affect revenue. And that was something on the side that I was looking at to see if that was a big lever that was, because as I'm doing experience, I want to make sure I don't break the whole process. So I had a side KPI that I was looking at myself. And here are the results. I mean, we started this in June of 2016, and then here's our actual opportunity to close rate, against the goal. the first couple months revenue, was flat. We didn't create as much, but then as we got better at it, we started to get to grow and move forward. So that's, and obviously we only for the first 2 or 3 months was this the main KPI. The behavior of the sales team really stuck, and we have the same opportunity, criteria that we have before. And that's, doing really well. So that behavior change is now still in place to this day based off of this experiment. So, Miguel, I do see your question. I'm going to answer that first in the Q&A because we're almost up to it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. 2 books I'm going to recommend. First one is sort of high level reading. This is one of my favorite books by Bill Walsh. He was a former, he's a Hall of Fame coach, but was a coach of the San Francisco 49ers. And this book basically covers how to manage a process, how to work a whole team of people towards a goal, and basically has the philosophy, like the book title is, the score takes care of itself, is if you do all the things to precision, all the preparation and all the process driven work, the score will take care of itself. Basically, you will hit the result. So this book is great for really inspiring that at a high level, sort of thinking of the theory of these things. On the practical side, one of my favorite, commenters on sort of what's going on in the software as a service space and sort of the data side is Tomas Tunguz. He has his own blog. I'll include a link in the email that I send out with the recording. But this book is a good summary of all the blog posts that he's had over the past few years. Really good at helping you understand data, but I've used him in the past for communicating trends or communicating progress to external people in the company. So either if I'm pitching investors or I'm trying to talk to board members and things like that, Tomas does a great job, really doing that down. So those are 2 books I require. Now Q&A. Don't worry about the image on the slide. It's an inside joke, between Craig, who's on our team, and not every Q&A slide includes this image. But I'm going to go to the chat and answer.